The telegram arrived at the Silver Spur Ranch on a Tuesday morning in late September of 1881, and Isaac Butler knew his life was about to change before he even unfolded the thin paper with trembling fingers. The sun beat down on the dusty Wyoming plains surrounding Rawlins as Isaac stood on the porch of his ranch house, reading the words that confirmed what he had hoped for and feared in equal measure. Margaret Pearson would arrive on Friday's train from Philadelphia. She had agreed to be his mail-order bride, and now there was no turning back from the arrangement he had made through the matrimonial agency 6 weeks prior. His hands were rough from years of working cattle and horses, but they shook like a schoolboy's as he clutched that telegram. Isaac was 27 years old, tall and lean with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of sage after rain. He had built his ranch from nothing over the past 5 years, proving up his homestead claim and expanding his herd through careful breeding and harder work than most men could endure. But a ranch needed more than cattle and determination. It needed a family, children to pass it on to, a woman's touch to make the rough timber house into a home. The winters were long and lonely, and Isaac had finally admitted to himself that he could not do this alone. He knew nothing about Margaret Pearson, except what she had written in 2 carefully composed letters. She was 23 years old, educated, and found herself without prospects in Philadelphia after her father's death left her penniless. She wrote with a clear hand and used proper grammar, which suggested refinement. She claimed to be healthy and willing to work hard. She had not sent a photograph, which had given Isaac pause, but her letters were honest and direct in a way that appealed to him. He had sent money for her train ticket and promised a wedding upon her arrival. What Isaac did not know, what Margaret's letters had carefully omitted, was that she had spent the last 3 years of her life in gambling halls and parlors, making her living at card tables with a skill that would have shocked Philadelphia society had they known the truth. She was indeed penniless and without prospects, but not for the reasons Isaac imagined. Friday came with a clarity of sky that seemed to magnify every sound. Isaac rode into Rawlins well before the train was due, his best horse groomed to a shine, his own face scraped clean of whiskers, his hair trimmed by his neighbor's wife that very morning. He wore his Sunday clothes and felt like a fraud in them, too aware of his calloused hands and the permanent squint lines around his eyes from years under the Wyoming sun. The train depot was a simple wooden structure, but it represented the thread that connected this rough Wyoming town to the rest of the world. Other people waited on the platform, though Isaac barely saw them. His heart hammered against his ribs as the distant whistle announced the train's approach. The locomotive pulled in with a screech of brakes and a blast of steam that momentarily obscured everything. As the cloud dissipated, passengers began to disembark, and Isaac searched each face with growing anxiety. What if she had changed her mind? What if she had taken his money and never boarded the train at all? Then he saw her. Margaret Pearson stepped down from the train car with the careful grace of someone who had learned to move with confidence in any situation. She wore a traveling dress of deep green that had seen better days but was clean and well maintained. Her hair was dark as a raven's wing, pinned up under a modest hat, and her eyes swept the platform with a sharp intelligence that took in everything at once. She was beautiful in an unconventional way, with strong features and a direct gaze that most men might find unsettling. Isaac found it captivating. She spotted him almost immediately. He had described himself in his letters, and he was the only man on the platform holding his hat in both hands like a shield and staring at the train passengers with obvious desperation. Margaret moved toward him, carrying a single worn carpetbag. As she approached, Isaac saw that her eyes were an unusual shade of amber, almost golden in the afternoon light. They assessed him with the same thorough examination he was giving her. Isaac Butler. Her voice was lower than he expected, with a slight rasp that suggested either a long journey or a woman who did not waste words on unnecessary softness. "Yes, madam, Miss Pearson." He felt like an idiot the moment the words left his mouth. Of course it was her. "Margaret, please." "I suppose we should dispense with formalities, given the circumstances." She set down her bag and extended her hand, not for him to kiss or hold gently, but to shake as one would shake a business partner's hand. Isaac took it, surprised by the firmness of her grip. "I am glad you came. I was not certain until I saw you stepping off that train." "I almost was not certain myself," Margaret admitted, and Isaac appreciated the honesty even as it sent a spike of concern through him. "It is a long way from Philadelphia to Wyoming, and I had ample time to reconsider." "What made you continue?" Margaret smiled, and it transformed her face from merely pretty to genuinely beautiful. "I have never been one to fold when I still have cards to play, and you seemed, from your letters, to be worth the gamble." Isaac did not understand the card references, but he took it as a positive sign. "I have a wagon. The ranch is about an hour's ride from town. I thought we might stop by the church and speak with Reverend Morrison if you are not too tired from your journey. You mean to marry today?" Margaret's eyebrows rose. "I thought it best not to compromise your reputation. But if you would prefer to wait, my neighbor Mrs. Callahan has agreed to host you until the wedding." "I did not want to presume." Margaret studied him for a long moment, and Isaac had the uncomfortable sensation of being read like a book. "You are sincere. That is refreshing. Very well, Mr. Butler. Let us not wait. I did not come all this way to delay the inevitable." It was not the most romantic acceptance Isaac could have imagined, but it was honest and practical, which suited him just fine. He picked up her carpetbag, which weighed almost nothing, and led her to his wagon. The church was a small, whitewashed building on the edge of town, its steeple pointing toward the endless blue sky like a finger asking for blessings. Reverend Morrison was a practical man who had performed many frontier weddings and asked few questions. Within the hour, Isaac and Margaret were married, with the Reverend's wife and the general store owner standing as witnesses. Margaret spoke her vows clearly, meeting Isaac's eyes with that same direct gaze. When Isaac slipped the simple gold band onto her finger, a ring that had belonged to his mother, Margaret's expression softened for just a moment before the composed mask returned. The ride out to the ranch was quiet. Margaret took in the landscape with interest, her eyes tracking across the rolling plains and distant mountains. "It is beautiful in a stark way, so much space." "Do you think you can be happy here?" Isaac asked, needing to know. "I think happiness is something we make, not something that is given to us by location or circumstance," Margaret said. "Ask me again in 6 months whether I have made it." The ranch house came into view as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. It was not large, just 4 rooms built of timber and stone, but it was solid and well made. A barn and several outbuildings stood nearby, and Isaac's small herd of cattle grazed in the distance. Isaac helped Margaret down from the wagon, again struck by the peculiar formality between them. They were married now, but they were strangers. He carried her bag inside and showed her the house he had spent the past week cleaning and organizing. The main room served as kitchen and living space, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. 2 bedrooms opened off this main room, and Isaac had prepared the larger one for Margaret, uncertain of what their arrangement would be on this first night. Margaret set her bag down and turned to face him. "I should tell you something before we go any further." I have not been entirely honest in my letters. Isaac's stomach dropped. What do you mean? I am not the genteel, impoverished lady you might have imagined. My father did die and leave me without means, that much is true. But I have been supporting myself for the past 3 years in a manner that you might find objectionable. Margaret lifted her chin as though daring him to judge her. I am a gambler, Mr. Butler. I made my living at card tables in Philadelphia. Poker, faro, vingt et un. I have a gift for reading people and calculating odds. It is not respectable work for a woman, but it kept me fed and housed. Isaac stared at her, processing this information. His first reaction was shock, quickly followed by a strange sense of relief. Is that all? Margaret blinked, clearly expecting a different response. Is that all? I just told you your new wife is a professional gambler. You said you made your living honestly through skill and calculation. You did not sell yourself. You did not steal. You used your intelligence to survive. Isaac found himself smiling despite the strangeness of the situation. My mother always said that God gave us our minds to use, not just to decorate our heads. Seems to me you took her advice. Margaret's composure cracked, and Isaac saw genuine emotion flicker across her face. Surprise, relief, and something that might have been the beginning of hope. You are a remarkable man, Isaac Butler. I am a practical one. We are married now, Margaret. Your past is your past. What matters is what we build from here. He hesitated, then continued. I will not force my attentions on you. You may have the bedroom, and I will sleep out here until you feel comfortable with me. We barely know each other. That is considerate of you, Margaret said softly. Though I suspect we will need to remedy that situation if we are to make a successful marriage. Over the following days, they began the delicate dance of learning each other. Isaac woke before dawn each morning, as was his habit, and found Margaret already in the kitchen making coffee. She was not an experienced cook, but she learned quickly and did not complain about the early hours or the hard work. Margaret watched Isaac work with the horses and cattle, asking questions that showed she was paying attention and thinking about how the ranch operated. She had a sharp mind for numbers and quickly took over managing the ranch accounts, organizing them in a way that made Isaac wonder how he had ever managed before. In the evenings, they sat by the fireplace and talked. Isaac told her about his childhood in Kansas, his decision to move west and claim land, the hard early years of building the ranch. Margaret spoke less about her past, but she talked about books she had read, places in Philadelphia she had loved, her father who had been a professor before drink took him. How did you learn to gamble? Isaac asked one evening, genuinely curious. Margaret smiled, shuffling a deck of cards that had appeared from her carpet bag. Her fingers moved with practiced ease, and the cards danced through her hands like living things. My father taught me card games when I was young. Mathematics, he said, could be understood through probability. After he died and I found myself alone, I remembered those lessons. I practiced until I was skilled enough to win more than I lost. It was not the life I imagined, but it was survival. Show me, Isaac said impulsively. Margaret dealt out a hand of poker, explaining the game as she did. Isaac knew the basics, but Margaret explained strategy, probability, the art of reading other players. Her passion for the subject was evident, and Isaac found himself drawn not just to her beauty but to her intelligence and the fire that lit her eyes when she talked about something that mattered to her. You miss it, he observed. Yes, Margaret admitted. Is that terrible? I know it is not respectable, but there was a thrill in it, in matching wits against someone and knowing that your skill could change your fortune. It made me feel alive in a way that few other things did. We have a game night at the saloon in town once a month, Isaac said thoughtfully. Mostly ranchers playing for modest stakes. Nothing like what you are used to, I imagine. But if you wanted to play, I would take you." Margaret looked at him as though he had offered her gold. "You would not be ashamed to be seen with a woman at a card table." "I would be proud to be seen with my wife, doing something she excels at." Isaac reached across the table and took her hand, the first time he had initiated physical contact since their wedding. "We are partners in this, Margaret. Your happiness matters to me." That night, Margaret invited him into the bedroom they were meant to share. The intimacy between them was tentative at first, both learning the landscape of the other, but there was genuine warmth and growing affection. Isaac was gentle and patient, and Margaret responded with a vulnerability she had not shown before. Afterward, lying in the darkness with Margaret's head resting on his shoulder, Isaac felt a contentment he had not known was possible. "I am glad you got on that train," he murmured into her hair. "So am I," Margaret whispered back. "So am I." The next few weeks fell into a comfortable rhythm. The weather began to turn as October arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and the first hints of the harsh winter to come. Isaac worked long days preparing the ranch, making sure there was sufficient hay stored, that the barn and outbuildings were secure against the coming storms. Margaret threw herself into learning the skills she would need. She practiced cooking with determination, trading recipes with Mrs. Callahan when they made trips into town. She learned to churn butter, to preserve vegetables, to mend clothes with neat stitches. But Isaac noticed that she grew restless as the days passed, like a thoroughbred kept too long in a stall. The monthly game night arrived in mid-October. Isaac drove Margaret into Rawlins as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The saloon was busy when they arrived, full of ranchers and townspeople enjoying a rare social evening. The card games were set up in the back room, and Isaac led Margaret through the crowd. He could feel the stares, hear the whispers. Women did not typically attend game night, let alone sit down at the tables. But Isaac kept his hand on the small of Margaret's back, a gesture of support and unity. Tom Welch, who owned the ranch neighboring Isaac's, looked up as they approached. "Isaac, you brought your new wife. That is wonderful, but I am not sure this is the place for a lady." "My wife enjoys cards," Isaac said evenly. "I thought she might like to play a hand or two if there is room at the table." The men exchanged glances. Finally, Dan Sterling, the owner of the general store, grinned. "Well, I am not one to turn down someone's money. Have a seat, Mrs. Butler. Let us see what you have got." Margaret sat down with composure, and Isaac saw her transform. The restless housewife disappeared, replaced by the confident gambler she had been. She played the first hand conservatively, folding early, watching the other players with those sharp amber eyes. By the third hand, Isaac could see she had taken the measure of everyone at the table. Tom Welch was aggressive, betting big to intimidate. Dan Sterling played conservatively, only staying in with good hands. The other two players, ranch hands Isaac knew casually, were simply not skilled enough to hide their reactions. Margaret began to win. Not every hand, which would have raised suspicions, but enough to slowly accumulate chips. She chatted pleasantly between hands, asking questions about the town and the people, making them comfortable with her presence even as she systematically took their money. After an hour, Tom Welch threw down his cards in frustration. "You are a sharp one, Mrs. Butler. Where did a lady learn to play like that?" "My father taught me," Margaret said, which was true as far as it went. He believed mathematics should be practical as well as theoretical. "Well, your mathematics are costing me money," Tom said, but he was grinning. "I think I am done for the night before my wife has my hide. But you are welcome at this table any time, Mrs. Butler. It is nice to have some real competition." As they left the saloon, Margaret's face was flushed with happiness. "Thank you," she said to Isaac, and there was real emotion in her voice. "Thank you for letting me be myself, for not asking me to hide what I am." Isaac pulled her close, right there on the main street of Rawlins, and kissed her soundly. "You are my wife. I want to know all of you, not some version you think I want to see." "I am falling in love with you," Margaret said, the words tumbling out as though she had not meant to say them. "I did not expect that. I thought this would be a practical arrangement, a business partnership, but you have given me something I did not know I needed." "What is that?" "Acceptance. Freedom to be who I am, the space to breathe." Margaret cupped his face in her hands. "I am falling in love with you, Isaac Butler, and I do not know what to do with all these feelings." "I know exactly what to do with them," Isaac said. "You hold on to them, you let them grow, and you build a life around them. Because I am falling in love with you too, Margaret. I have been since the moment you stepped off that train and looked at me like you could see straight through to my soul." They made love that night with a new intensity, the physical expression of emotions they were only beginning to understand. Margaret was passionate and uninhibited, and Isaac responded with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. As winter approached, their bond deepened. Isaac taught Margaret to ride, and she proved to be a quick learner with good instincts. They rode out together to check on the cattle, and Margaret learned to read the land the way Isaac did, to spot trouble before it became a crisis. Margaret continued to attend game night, and word spread about the rancher's wife who could play cards like a riverboat gambler. Some of the women in town whispered about it, questioning whether it was proper. But Mrs. Callahan, whose opinion carried weight, declared that a woman who could use her mind to earn money was no different than a man doing the same, and that was the end of most criticism. The first major snowstorm hit in November, a howling beast that locked them inside for 3 days. Isaac and Margaret spent the time talking, making love, and learning the contours of their shared life. Isaac taught her to play chess, surprised to find she picked it up quickly and within days was beating him as often as he beat her. "You have a gift for games," he observed, moving his knight and immediately realizing he had made a mistake. "I have a gift for reading people and understanding systems," Margaret corrected, taking his knight with her bishop. "Games are just formalized systems with human elements. Once you understand both, the rest is practice and discipline." "Check," she added, and Isaac saw that he had walked into a trap 3 moves earlier that he had not even seen her setting. "How did you do that?" Margaret showed him the sequence of moves, explaining how she had set it up while appearing to respond to his attacks. "You were thinking 1 move ahead. I was thinking 5 moves ahead. That is the difference between a casual player and a professional." "Teach me," Isaac said impulsively. "Teach me to think like you do." So Margaret began to teach him, not just chess but the deeper skills underneath. How to read body language, the tiny tells that revealed what someone was thinking. How to calculate odds quickly in your head. How to manage risk and know when to push your advantage and when to fold and wait for a better opportunity. As Isaac learned, he realized these skills applied far beyond card tables. Understanding how to read people made him better at negotiating cattle sales. Calculating odds helped him decide which risks to take with the ranch and which to avoid. Margaret was not just his wife. She was making him better at everything he did. Winter deepened, and they settled into a comfortable domesticity that neither had expected to find. Margaret discovered she was pregnant in late December, confirmed by Dr. Harrison on a clear day when they could make it into town. Isaac's joy was profound and immediate. Margaret's reaction was more complicated. "I have never thought of myself as a mother," she admitted as they drove back to the ranch. "I do not know if I will be any good at it." "You will be excellent at it," Isaac assured her. You approach everything with intelligence and determination. Why would this be different? Because a child is not a card game or a horse to be trained. A child is a person with needs and emotions I may not understand. Margaret's voice held a vulnerability Isaac rarely heard from her. Then we will figure it out together, the same way we have figured out everything else, Isaac said. I am not an expert on children either, Margaret. We will learn as we go, and we will do it together. The winter was hard, as Wyoming winters always were, but the house was warm and their love warmed them even more. Isaac marveled at the changes in Margaret as the pregnancy progressed. She remained sharp and capable, but there was a softening around the edges, a willingness to be vulnerable that she had not shown before. In February, during a brief thaw, Tom Welch stopped by the ranch. "Isaac, I have a proposition for you," he said, accepting the coffee Margaret poured. "I am looking to sell off some of my breeding stock. I know you have been wanting to expand your herd and I can offer you a good price. But there is a catch." "What catch?" Isaac asked, immediately wary. "I need the money up front, cannot do payment over time like we normally would." Tom looked embarrassed. "I have some debts that need settling and I need cash now." Isaac did the math in his head. He had savings, but not enough to take full advantage of Tom's offer without leaving them dangerously short for the rest of the year. It was a good opportunity, but the risk was high. "Let me talk to Margaret," he said, and Tom nodded understanding. After Tom left, Isaac laid out the situation. "It is a significant risk. If we had a bad year, if the cattle got sick, or if prices dropped, we could lose everything. But if it works out, we could double our herd size and be set for years." Margaret listened carefully, asking questions about the cattle, the market, the various risks involved. Finally, she said, "What are the odds you consider this working out, if I am being honest?" 60-40 in our favor, maybe. "Those are good odds for a gamble this size," Margaret said thoughtfully, "but we can improve them." "How?" "Let me go to Cheyenne. There is a high-stakes poker game that runs every spring. I have heard of it even in Philadelphia. If I can get into that game, I can win us the money we need without touching our savings. That way, if the cattle investment fails, we still have our safety net." Isaac's first instinct was to refuse. The idea of Margaret traveling to Cheyenne, pregnant and alone, to play in a high-stakes game with who knows what kind of men, made every protective instinct he had scream in protest. But he forced himself to think past the emotion. "That is dangerous," he said finally. "Not just the travel, but the game itself. High-stakes games attract serious players and sometimes serious trouble." "I know. But I am good, Isaac, really good. And this is what I do. This is my way of contributing something beyond cooking and cleaning." Margaret's eyes held both determination and a plea for understanding. "Let me do this. Let me help build our future using the skills I have." Isaac struggled with the decision for 2 days. He weighed the practical benefits against the risks and his own discomfort with the plan. Finally, he realized that refusing would be the same as telling Margaret that her skills and abilities did not matter, that she should stay in the narrow box society prescribed for women. "If you do this, I am coming with you," he said. "I will not play or interfere, but I will be there." "That is my condition." Margaret agreed immediately. They made plans to travel to Cheyenne in early April, after the worst of the winter weather had passed, but before the game ended its spring run. Isaac arranged for the neighbor's son to watch the ranch and animals. The journey to Cheyenne took 3 days by stage, and every bump and jostle made Isaac nervous about Margaret's condition. But she weathered the travel well, her excitement about the upcoming game overriding any discomfort. Cheyenne was a real city compared to Rawlins, with electric lights and buildings 2 and 3 stories tall. The poker game ran out of a private room in the back of the Occidental Hotel, one of the finest establishments in the territory. Getting Margaret into the game proved to be the first challenge. The organizer, a sharp-eyed man named Collins, looked her up and down with undisguised skepticism. "This is a serious game, Mrs. Butler. The buy-in is $500, and most pots run into the thousands." "I am not running a social club here." "I understand perfectly," Margaret said, her voice cool and professional. "I am prepared to put up the buy-in, and I assure you I am a serious player. We do not typically allow women at this table." "Then perhaps your players are not confident enough in their skills to compete on equal terms," Margaret replied. "I would hate to think the Great Cheyenne game was afraid of one woman with a deck of cards." Colin's eyes narrowed, but Isaac saw the hint of a smile. "You have nerve, lady." "I will give you that. Fine. Your money is as good as anyone's, but if you cannot keep up, you are out." The game room was thick with cigar smoke and tension. 6 men sat around the table, all of them experienced players with hard eyes and harder reputations. They looked up as Margaret entered, and Isaac saw calculations being made, assumptions formed. They thought she would be easy money. Isaac took a seat against the wall where he could watch without interfering. He had never been more nervous in his life, not even during the worst storms or the hardest cattle drives. This was Margaret's arena, and all he could do was trust in her skill. Margaret took her seat and bought in, stacking her chips with steady hands. She played the first few hands conservatively, folding early, her eyes moving constantly around the table. Isaac recognized what she was doing, gathering information, reading the other players, forming her strategy. The game went on for hours. Margaret won some hands and lost others, but Isaac noticed she was slowly accumulating chips. Nothing dramatic, just a steady accretion that came from superior skill and patience. The other players began to take her seriously, their initial dismissiveness replaced by wariness. One player, a cattle broker named Reynolds, clearly resented Margaret's presence. He bet aggressively when she was in hands, trying to intimidate her into folding. Margaret responded by calling his bluffs with calm precision, taking 3 significant pots from him in the space of an hour. "You are either the luckiest woman in Wyoming or you are cheating," Reynolds said finally, his face red with anger and whiskey. The room went silent. Accusations of cheating in a game like this were serious, potentially deadly. Isaac tensed, ready to intervene if things turned violent. Margaret's expression did not change. "I am neither lucky nor a cheat, Mr. Reynolds. I am simply better at this game than you are. If you cannot handle losing to a woman, perhaps you should find a different table." Collins laughed, breaking the tension. "She has you there, Reynolds. I have been watching, and Mrs. Butler is playing clean. She is just playing smart. Now, are we going to continue, or are you going to fold because your pride is hurt?" Reynolds threw down his cards and left, and the game continued. With her main antagonist gone, Margaret relaxed slightly and began to play more aggressively. Isaac watched in fascination as she controlled the table, knowing when to push and when to back off, reading each player with uncanny accuracy. By midnight, Margaret had tripled her original stake. By 2 in the morning, she had quintupled it. The other players were exhausted, making mistakes, but Margaret remained sharp and focused. Finally, in a hand that came down to Margaret and a railroad executive named Thompson, she pushed all her chips into the center. Thompson studied his cards, studied Margaret, then looked at the pot. He had more chips than Margaret and could afford to call, but Isaac saw the moment he decided she was not bluffing. Thompson folded, and Margaret raked in a pot worth over $3,000. "Gentlemen, I think this is an appropriate time for me to cash out," Margaret said, stacking her chips. "It has been a pleasure." Collins counted out her winnings in cash and scrip, all of it legal and documented. "Mrs. Butler, you are welcome at this table anytime." That was some of the finest playing I have seen in years. Outside the hotel, in the cool early morning air, Isaac pulled Margaret into his arms. "You were magnificent. I have never seen anything like that." "I told you I was good," Margaret said, but she was trembling now that the tension had released. "I was terrified the entire time. One wrong move, one bad read, and I could have lost everything. But you did not. You bet on yourself and you won." Isaac kissed her forehead. "We can buy Tom's cattle and have money left over. You just changed our lives." The journey back to Rawlins was triumphant. They stopped in town to finalize the deal with Tom Welch, paying cash for breeding stock that would indeed transform the ranch's fortunes. Word spread quickly about Margaret's success in Cheyenne, adding to her growing reputation. Spring arrived with a rush of green across the plains and new calves being born. Margaret's pregnancy progressed, and Isaac found himself constantly amazed by her strength. She continued to work, to manage the ranch accounts, to ride out with him when she felt up to it. Their son was born in late July, a hot afternoon when the doctor almost did not make it in time. Margaret labored for 12 hours, and Isaac stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand and wiping her forehead, feeling helpless in the face of her pain. When the baby finally arrived, crying lustily and perfect, Isaac wept. They named him James after Isaac's father, and he had Margaret's amber eyes and Isaac's stubborn chin. Parenthood transformed them both. Isaac discovered reserves of patience and tenderness he had not known he possessed. Margaret, who had worried about her maternal instincts, proved to be fiercely protective and surprisingly gentle with their son. The cattle investment paid off better than they had hoped. The breeding stock was exceptional, and by fall, Isaac's herd had grown significantly. The ranch prospered, allowing them to hire a hand to help with the increased work. On their first wedding anniversary, Isaac gave Margaret a gift he had been planning for months. It was a custom-made card table, built from fine wood and covered in green felt, with her initials inlaid in mother-of-pearl on one corner. "For when you want to practice, or when you want to host a game here," Isaac explained. "I thought maybe some of the women in town might like to learn to play if you were willing to teach them." Margaret ran her fingers over the smooth wood, tears in her eyes. "You continue to surprise me, Isaac Butler." Most men would want their wives to give up gambling to become conventional and respectable. "I do not want a conventional wife. I want you exactly as you are." Isaac pulled her close. "Besides, I have been thinking. There is money to be made in gaming, real money. Not just from playing, but from organizing. What if we opened a proper gaming hall in Rawlins? Something respectable, well-run, where people could play cards and socialize. You could manage it, use all your skills. We could make it a real business." Margaret stared at him. "You would do that?" "Invest in something so unconventional." "I would invest in you. Your intelligence, your skills, your passion for this. I have watched you come alive at the card table. Why should you have to hide that or only indulge it once a month? Let's build something with it." They spent the winter planning. Isaac used his connections among the ranchers and businessmen to generate interest and investment. Margaret designed the layout and rules, creating a gaming hall that would be both profitable and respectable enough to avoid the stigma of a common gambling den. The Rawlins Card Club opened in the spring of 1883 in a building on Main Street that they had renovated specifically for the purpose. It had 3 card tables, a small bar, and a strict set of rules that Margaret enforced without mercy. No excessive drinking, no cheating, no violence, and everyone who entered was treated with respect regardless of gender or social position. It was a radical concept for a Wyoming town, but it worked. Margaret's reputation drew serious players from across the territory, and the respectability of the operation attracted townspeople who would never have set foot in a traditional saloon. Women came to learn to play, discovering a social outlet and a mental challenge that many had been craving. Isaac watched his wife bloom in this new role. She was not just dealing cards, she was teaching, mentoring, creating a space where people could test themselves against each other in games of skill and strategy. The club became a gathering place, a center of social life in Rawlins. Their family grew as well. A daughter arrived in 1884 with her father's coloring and her mother's sharp mind. They named her Catherine, and she proved to be as strong-willed as her mother. Another son followed in 1886, whom they named William after Margaret's father, and he was the quiet one, content to watch and think before acting. The ranch continued to prosper under Isaac's management, now one of the largest and most successful operations in the region. The gaming club brought in steady income and gave Margaret an outlet for her considerable talents. Together, they had built something neither could have achieved alone. On a summer evening in 1889, 8 years after Margaret had stepped off that train, they sat on the porch of their expanded ranch house and watched their children play in the yard. James was nearly 8 now, already showing an interest in both ranching and numbers. Catherine was 5, stubborn and fearless. William was 3, quiet but intensely focused when something captured his attention. "You ever regret it?" Isaac asked Margaret, taking her hand. "Getting on that train, coming to a place you had never seen to marry a man you did not know?" Margaret leaned her head on his shoulder. "Not for a single moment. I took the biggest gamble of my life when I came to Wyoming. I bet everything on an unknown outcome with uncertain odds. And how did that gamble turn out?" "You told me to bet on you, that you were my sure thing," Margaret said, smiling at the memory Isaac did not have of words she had needed to hear in her own mind during those uncertain early days. "You were right. You were my sure thing, Isaac, the safest bet I ever made. Coming to you, building this life with you, it has been the best decision I ever made." Isaac pulled her closer, kissing the top of her head. "I was the one who gambled, bringing a bride sight unseen from Philadelphia. But the moment you stepped off that train, I knew I had won. I just did not know how much I had won until I really got to know you." "We were both gamblers," Margaret said, "but we played the hand we were dealt with skill and patience, and we built something beautiful from it." Inside the house, they could hear the clock chiming 8. Margaret stood, brushing off her skirt. "I need to get the children ready for bed. Will you help?" "Always," Isaac said, following her inside. Later that night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Isaac and Margaret sat at her card table. She dealt out a hand of poker, and they played not for money but simply for the joy of the game and each other's company. "I love you," Isaac said, studying his cards. "I do not say it enough, but I do. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." "I love you too," Margaret replied, her amber eyes soft in the lamplight. "You gave me something I did not know I was looking for. A home, a family, and the freedom to be myself. You let me be both a wife and a gambler, a mother and a businesswoman. You never asked me to choose." "Why would I ask you to choose? You are all of those things. That is who you are." Margaret won the hand, as she usually did, but Isaac did not mind. Losing to his wife at cards was a small price to pay for winning at life. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. The ranch expanded further, and Isaac took on a partner to help manage the growing operation. The gaming club evolved into one of the most respected establishments in Wyoming, drawing players from across the West and earning Margaret a reputation that extended far beyond Rawlins. Their children grew and thrived. James showed aptitude for both ranching and business, often working alongside his father during the day and helping his mother with the club's accounts in the evening. Catherine proved to be a natural rider and had no patience for traditional female restrictions, much to her mother's amusement and pride. William was the scholar, always reading, always asking questions about how things worked. In 1892, tragedy struck when a harsh winter decimated cattle herds across Wyoming. Many ranchers were ruined, losing years of work in a few brutal months. Isaac and Margaret's ranch survived better than most due to the careful planning and diversified income, but they were not untouched. They lost a significant portion of their herd, and for the first time since the early days, money was tight. Isaac felt the weight of responsibility heavily. "I should have been more prepared. I should have planned better." "You did everything right," Margaret assured him. "Sometimes you play perfectly and still lose the hand. That is the nature of risk. But we are not finished. We have resources, we have skills, and we have each other. We will rebuild." And they did. Margaret increased the stakes at the gaming club, attracting higher-level players and generating more revenue. Isaac worked with his neighbors to pool resources and purchase shared breeding stock. Together, they navigated the crisis and emerged stronger. The incident reinforced what they had always known, but perhaps had taken for granted. They were truly partners in every sense, each contributing their unique strengths, covering for each other's weaknesses, building something greater than the sum of its parts. By 1895, the ranch had recovered and exceeded its previous size. The gaming club had expanded into a second building, now offering not just cards but also a restaurant and a small hotel for traveling players. Isaac and Margaret had become pillars of the Rawlins community, respected and even admired despite the unconventional nature of some of their business. Their children were teenagers now, and the question of their futures loomed large. James was 17 and already taking on significant responsibility at the ranch. Catherine was 14 and had declared her intention to learn every aspect of both the ranch and the gaming club, refusing to limit herself to traditionally female roles. William, at 12, was the most uncertain, interested in engineering and talking about going east for education. One evening, the family gathered around the dinner table for a serious discussion. "We wanted to talk to you about the future," Isaac began. "The ranch and the club, everything we have built, it is for you three. But we want to know what you want, not just assume you will follow in our footsteps." James spoke first. "I want the ranch if you will have me as a partner now and as the owner eventually. I love this life and I am good at it." "You are," Isaac agreed with pride. "And yes, I would be honored to have you as a partner." Catherine leaned forward eagerly. "I want to run the gaming club. Mother has been teaching me, and I have her gift for reading people and calculating odds. But I also have ideas for expanding, for making it even more successful." Margaret exchanged a glance with Isaac, both of them amused and impressed by their daughter's ambition. "We can discuss that. You are still young, but there is no reason you cannot begin taking on more responsibility." William looked nervous. "I want to go to college. I want to study engineering and mathematics. I know that means leaving Wyoming, maybe for years." Isaac felt a pang at the thought of his youngest leaving, but he kept his voice steady. "Then that is what you should do. Your mother and I will support whatever choice you make. We have the means to send you to a good school, and we want you to pursue your passions the way we have pursued ours." The relief on William's face was palpable. "Thank you. I do not want to disappoint you by not staying here." "You could never disappoint us," Margaret said firmly. We want you to build your own life, whatever that looks like. That is what your father and I did, and it has served us well." As their children grew into adults and began to take over various aspects of the family enterprises, Isaac and Margaret found themselves with more time to simply enjoy each other. They took trips together, visiting other towns and cities, always finding the local gaming establishments and analyzing their operations. On their 20th anniversary, in 1901, they returned to the train depot in Rawlins where they had first met. The town had grown significantly, and the depot was busier and more modern, but the bones of it were the same. "You remember standing here waiting for me?" Margaret asked, her hand in Isaac's. "Every detail. I was terrified you would not come, and then terrified you would and would take one look at me and get back on the train," Isaac admitted. "I almost did," Margaret confessed. "When I saw this dusty little town and thought about the life I was committing to, I nearly turned around. But then I saw you, standing there with your hat in your hands, looking at me like I was something precious. And I thought, maybe this gamble will pay off." "Best gamble either of us ever made," Isaac said, pulling her close. They stood there for a long moment, holding each other on the platform where their lives had intersected 2 decades earlier. Around them, people rushed to catch trains or greet arriving passengers, all of them engaged in their own journeys and taking their own risks. "Do you think we have been good?" Margaret asked quietly. "Not just successful, but good. Have we built something worthwhile?" Isaac considered the question seriously. "We have built a family that loves and respects each other. We have created businesses that provide for people and treat them fairly. We have lived honestly and on our own terms. Yes, my love, I think we have been good." "I think so too," Margaret said. "We took broken pieces, mine and yours, and made something whole and beautiful." The years continued their march. James married in 1903, wedding a schoolteacher from Cheyenne, and they began to add grandchildren to the family. Catherine took over full management of the gaming club in 1905 and promptly expanded it into a small chain, opening additional locations in Cheyenne and Laramie. William graduated from the Colorado School of Mines in 1906 and took a position with a railroad company, but he returned to Wyoming regularly to visit. Isaac and Margaret gradually stepped back from active management of their businesses, trusting their capable children to carry on what they had built. They spent more time at the ranch house, enjoying the simple pleasures of watching sunsets from the porch and playing cards by lamplight. In 1911, at 70 years old, Margaret developed a persistent cough that turned out to be pneumonia. Dr. Harrison, now elderly himself but still practicing, was honest about the prognosis. "At your age, Margaret, this is serious. You need to rest and let your body heal." But Margaret was stubborn, pushing herself to stay active, refusing to be confined to bed. Isaac watched her with concern and frustration, recognizing in her determination the same quality that had made her such a successful gambler. She would not fold, even when the odds were against her. One evening, as they sat together in the room they had shared for 30 years, Margaret took Isaac's hand. "If this is the end, I want you to know that I have no regrets. You gave me a beautiful life." "This is not the end," Isaac said firmly. "You are too stubborn to let a little pneumonia win." Margaret smiled weakly. "I have always known when to fight and when to accept the cards I have been dealt. But whatever happens, promise me you will remember that I chose you. Every single day I chose you. And I chose you," Isaac said, tears streaming down his weathered face. "Every day, always." But Margaret was right in her assessment. She recovered from the pneumonia, surprising Dr. Harrison and delighting her family. "I am not done yet," she announced when she was back on her feet. "I still have games to play and grandchildren to teach, and she did. Margaret lived to see 7 grandchildren, all of them learning to play cards under her exacting tutelage. She continued to oversee the gaming clubs well into her 70s, her mind remaining sharp even as her body slowed. Isaac remained by her side through it all, his love for her never diminishing. They had grown old together, 2 gamblers who had bet everything on each other and won beyond their wildest dreams. On a spring morning in 1921, 40 years after Margaret had stepped off the train in Rawlins, they woke together in the ranch house that had become home. The sun was streaming through the window, and Margaret's white hair was spread across the pillow. Isaac, now 77, looked at his wife of 80 years and still saw the beautiful, fierce woman who had taken his breath away all those years ago. "Good morning, my sure thing," Margaret murmured, her amber eyes still bright despite the years. "Good morning, my beautiful gambler," Isaac replied, kissing her forehead. They rose and dressed slowly, helping each other with buttons and laces as they had for years. Breakfast was simple but delicious, prepared by James's wife who was staying with them. Their children and many of their grandchildren lived nearby, creating a tight-knit family network. After breakfast, Margaret suggested a ride. "Let us go out to the north pasture, where you first taught me to ride. I want to see the land again." They saddled 2 gentle horses and rode out into the Wyoming morning. The land had not changed much in 40 years. The grass still rolled endlessly toward distant mountains, and the sky was still that impossible blue that seemed unique to this part of the world. They dismounted near a small creek where wildflowers bloomed in profusion. Isaac spread a blanket, and they sat together, holding hands and watching the water flow past. "I have been thinking about that day at the depot," Margaret said. "About the moment I decided to stay, to give this wild gamble a chance. It was the best decision I ever made." "I was so nervous," Isaac admitted. "I kept thinking you would realize you had made a terrible mistake and demand to be taken back to the train. And I kept thinking you would realize I was not the genteel lady you expected and send me away. Instead, we found each other, 2 unlikely people who somehow fit together perfectly." Margaret leaned against Isaac's shoulder. "Do you know what the real gamble was? Not the marriage arrangement, not even moving west. The real gamble was opening our hearts, allowing ourselves to be vulnerable, choosing to love even though love always carries the risk of loss. It was a risk worth taking," Isaac said. "Every single day with you has been worth any pain that might come." They sat there for hours, reminiscing about their 40 years together. The challenges they had overcome, the children they had raised, the businesses they had built, the life they had shared. It had not always been easy, but it had always been worthwhile. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that echoed their first night together, Margaret turned to Isaac. "If I could go back and do it all over again, I would not change a single thing." "Well, maybe I would have kissed you sooner." Isaac laughed, and the sound was young despite his years. "I would not change anything either, though I might have told you I loved you on our wedding day instead of waiting weeks. We had time to get there," Margaret said. And getting there together made it all the more precious. They rode back to the ranch as darkness fell, comfortable in each other's presence in the way only decades of partnership can create. The house was lit up, warm and welcoming, full of the sounds of family. That night as they lay in bed, Isaac held Margaret close. "Thank you," he whispered into the darkness. "For what? For taking the gamble, for getting on that train, for betting on me." "You told me you were my sure thing," Margaret said softly. "And you were. You absolutely were." The morning brought sadness, as Margaret had passed peacefully in her sleep, her hand still holding Isaac's. The family gathered, grieving but also celebrating a life well lived and a love that had never wavered. Isaac was lost without her. For 40 years, Margaret had been his partner, his love, his best friend. The house felt empty even when filled with family. The ranch, the businesses, all the things they had built together seemed meaningless without her to share them with. But as the months passed, Isaac found comfort in the legacy they had created. Their children were happy and successful, carrying forward the values Margaret and Isaac had instilled. The gaming clubs operated under Catherine's capable management, maintaining the standards of fairness and respect that Margaret had established. The ranch thrived under James's stewardship. William had become a respected engineer, designing bridges and railroads across the West. Isaac spent his remaining time writing down the story of their life together, wanting future generations to know how two gamblers had bet on each other and won everything that mattered. He wrote about Margaret's courage in coming west, her intelligence and skill at cards, her fierce love for her family. He wrote about the life they had built from nothing but hope and determination. On a cold morning in January 1923, less than 2 years after Margaret's death, Isaac passed away in his sleep. He was 79 years old, and his last words to his children had been about how much he loved their mother and how grateful he was to be going to meet her again. The funeral brought people from across Wyoming and beyond. Ranchers, business people, professional gamblers, and ordinary folks who had been touched by the unusual couple who had built an empire on love and trust. They told stories of Margaret's fairness at the card tables, Isaac's integrity in business, and the deep love that had been evident to everyone who saw them together. James, Catherine, and William stood together at their parents' grave, which was positioned on a hill overlooking the ranch. The headstone was simple but elegant, reading Isaac Butler, 1844–1923, Margaret Pearson Butler, 1858–1921. Two gamblers who bet on love and won. They were remarkable, Catherine said, tears streaming down her face. They built all of this from nothing, and they did it together. They showed us what partnership really means, James added. Not just in business, but in life. They supported each other, believed in each other, loved each other without reservation. William, the quietest of the three, spoke last. They taught us that the biggest risks can bring the biggest rewards. Mother risked everything coming west. Father risked his heart on a stranger, and together they created something beautiful. The legacy of Isaac and Margaret Butler lived on for generations. The ranch continued under James's descendants, eventually becoming one of the largest operations in Wyoming. The gaming clubs evolved with the times, eventually transitioning into legitimate casinos when gambling was legalized decades later. William's children and grandchildren became engineers and builders, carrying forward his passion for creating infrastructure. But more than the businesses and the property, Isaac and Margaret's real legacy was in the example they had set. They had shown that love could transcend social conventions, that partnerships built on mutual respect and support could achieve remarkable things, and that taking a chance on another person could be the best gamble anyone ever made. In the small museum that James's great-granddaughter eventually opened in Rawlins, there was a special room dedicated to Isaac and Margaret. It contained Margaret's custom card table, Isaac's worn saddle, photographs of the family, and copies of Isaac's written account of their life together. Visitors came from across the country to learn about the mail-order bride who was a professional gambler, and the cowboy who told her to bet on him. The most popular exhibit was a display of letters between Isaac and Margaret from their courtship, along with the telegram that had announced her arrival. Next to them was a placard with a quote from Isaac's memoir, Margaret told me once that the biggest gamble of her life was getting on that train to Wyoming. But I was the real gambler. I bet my future, my heart, and my happiness on a woman I had never met. I told her I was her sure thing, that betting on me was the safest wager she could make. It turned out we were both right. We were each other's sure thing, the safest and best bet either of us ever made. Together, we won everything that mattered. The story of Isaac and Margaret Butler became a legend in Wyoming, a tale told to illustrate that true love could be found in the most unexpected places, and that the willingness to take a chance on another person could change everything. Their life together had been built on a gamble, but it was a gamble supported by mutual respect, shared values, and a growing love that had only deepened with time. Years after their deaths, on quiet evenings at the ranch, family members would sometimes report seeing two figures walking hand in hand across the north pasture where the wildflowers bloomed. Whether it was truly the spirits of Isaac and Margaret or simply the power of their love story to capture imaginations, no one could say for certain. What was certain was that their descendants carried forward the lessons Isaac and Margaret had taught through their example. Take calculated risks. Bet on the people you love. Build partnerships based on respect and support. Honor your commitments. Use your unique gifts. Create something meaningful that lasts beyond your lifetime. The ranch house where they had lived and loved was preserved by the family, maintained as it had been during Isaac and Margaret's time. Visitors could see Margaret's card table still set up in the front room, could walk through the bedroom where their children had been born, could stand on the porch where they had watched so many sunsets together. In the end, the story of Isaac Butler and Margaret Pearson was a testament to the transformative power of love and the courage it takes to build a life with another person. They had started as strangers bound by a practical arrangement, but they had become something far greater. They had become partners in the truest sense, lovers who never stopped choosing each other, friends who understood each other completely. Margaret had been a gambler, skilled at reading odds and taking calculated risks. Isaac had been a cowboy and rancher, practical and hardworking. Together, they had built an empire, raised a family, and created a love story that would inspire generations. Isaac had told Margaret to bet on him, promising he was her sure thing, and he had been right. But what made their story truly special was that Margaret had been his sure thing too. In a world of uncertainty and risk, they had found certainty in each other. And that, in the end, was the greatest win of all.